All right, it's 1:01 p.m. Eastern Time. My name is Christian Numi. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm a Research and Evaluation Associate at the Future Skills Center. I would really like to welcome you to today's webinar on building economic resilience, skills development in Indigenous and Northern communities. This session is part of our ongoing work to explore how we can build an inclusive, equitable skills development ecosystem, one that acknowledges and addresses systemic barriers faced by Indigenous and Northern communities. I'll first go through a land acknowledgement, then the agenda, some housekeeping, and I'll introduce our speaker and the panelists. Given that the Future Skills Center is hosting this event, then that land acknowledgement is specific to Toronto. However, I encourage you all, wherever you are, to reflect and acknowledge the specific land you are currently located in. The Future Skills Center acknowledges that Toronto is situated upon traditional and current Indigenous territories that include the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. The treaties that cover these territories include the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes, and the Upper Canada Treaties. Here's our agenda for today. This webinar is scheduled for about 60 minutes. A presentation by the Conference Board of Canada will set the stage for our conversation. Then a panel featuring two of our partners from Entrepreneurs and from Jelly Digital Marketing and PR Agency. That panel will engage in deep discussion around the topic of today. We'll have a Q&A period, and we'll wrap everything up with some closing remarks and a short survey. Now, a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be shared with registered attendees in the next few days. We encourage you to interact with us using the Q&A option in the Zoom screen panel. Feel free to engage in English and French. Nous souhaitons la bienvenue particulière à nos participants francophones. Simultaneous interpretation services in English and French are available at the bottom of your Zoom screen. By default, it's set in English, but you can switch to French if you prefer. Before introducing our panel and speaker, I'll add that we are hoping you can join us on November 18th at 11 Eastern Time for a peer learning group for a deeper dive into today's topic. It will provide participants with the opportunity to discuss common interests, challenges, and resources. The goal of the peer learning group is to facilitate an open discussion among participants in an informal and safe shared space. So check that out. Now, let me introduce you our speaker and panelist. Amanda Thompson is a lead research associate, Indigenous and Northern Communities at the Conference Board of Canada. Amanda will have a presentation in a moment. Tricia Williams. Tricia Williams, FSC's Director for Research, Evaluation, and Knowledge Mobilization, will moderate the panel discussion that we feature Zina Cohen, a co-director of Entrepreneurs, and Darian Kovac, a founding partner of Jelly Digital Marketing and PR Agency. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to Amanda Thompson for her presentation. Amanda, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, it's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Amanda Thompson. I'm from the Indigenous Northern Communities team at the Conference Board of Canada. Someone else is sharing. Oh, please.
Stop share now.
Yep.
You can go ahead.
Bear with me here. There we go. I think everybody can see my presentation okay now. So I'm just going to give a brief presentation, a little bit about some work that the Conference Board of Canada has done, looking at kind of labor markets in a northern context, and share some work specifically from one of our larger multi-year projects, Learning from One Another, which took a deep dive into labor markets in Yukon, Nunavut, and Northern Ontario. This project pulled in a lot of different partners who we are forever grateful that supported with this work, including post-secondary institutes, training organizations, Indigenous communities, as well as governments. And the main kind of overarching goal of the project was working towards keeping wealth and employment opportunities in the North. So I'm not going to be able to cover obviously everything that we did in the project today, but some of the stuff I'm going to share to you come from some of the objectives from the project. So the first one is identifying in-demand skills. So we leverage expertise from the Conference Board of Canada to forecast which industries will see employment growth and what occupations will be in demand in each one of these regions between 2024 and 2045. Another component of the project, which really focused upon speaking with regional employers across these regions, as well as labor market analysis, looked at identifying the main challenges to recruiting and retaining labor in these regions. And then the last one really looked at kind of closing skills gaps and getting regional perspectives on the challenges and the strategies to addressing skills gaps. So getting first into kind of some of those forecasts that we did and identifying in-demand skills. From the forecast, we find that employment will grow across all three of these regions. It'll grow by about 5% in Northern Ontario, the demand for employment, 10% in Yukon, and 18% in Nunavut over the next 20 years. And there will be a significant demand for skills that require a post-secondary education. So among kind of those top 50 jobs that we saw being in demand in Northern Ontario, 55% of them will require a post-secondary education. In Yukon, that number is 63%, and in Nunavut, it's about 62%. And in terms of what occupations will be in demand, surprisingly, there is a lot of overlap between the three regions. So kind of our top occupations, there'll be the demand for skills in healthcare, mainly centered around nursing, different levels of nursing, different scopes of nursing, demand for social services, demand for skills in education, and this is across the gamut. So teachers at all different levels, ECEs, early childhood educators, as well as teacher assistants. There'll be a demand for skills in business, as well as a demand for skills in trades across a variety of different trades. So those are kind of where the key skills that will be needed over the next 20 years across these three regions. But we also spoke to regional employers, a lot of them from across these three regions, who highlighted some of the other skills that they see as being in demand. So digital skills, always a big one. Leadership and management skills was another one that was identified as being in demand. A lot of employers talked about the need of having to kind of grow their own leaders and managers from within their organization, very difficult to attract them. And this includes skills not just around managing work performance, but mental health and well-being of employees, as well as skills around inclusive management skills. So large number of very diverse Indigenous populations living in these regions, as well as kind of new Canadians who have joined the northern regions to bring their skills there as well. Soft skills is another one big in demand. I will highlight cultural competence as something that many employers have started working towards so that services and the working environment can be culturally safe and culturally understanding. And then skills around kind of business and financial skills for small business owners. So having small businesses in some of these small regions really helps diversify the economy, especially when the economy is driven by one or two main industries. So skills around succession planning, so turnover and building new businesses, as well as e-commerce and marketing. The next kind of section I'm going to talk about from the project is just understanding the challenges to recruiting and retaining skilled labor in these regions. So this information comes from both the data analysis of publicly available data, employer data, as well as our conversations with employers. But what we hear consistently in talking to all the employers across these regions is that there is a high demand for labor. Northern Ontario, Nunavut, and Yukon have some of the highest vacancy rates in the country, so the highest number of jobs that aren't filled. And this translates to increasing competition across the sectors for labor. Public service, public administration is a major employer across these three regions. So many businesses often compete with the public sector for specific skills, and with wages and benefits and pensions where they are, it can make it difficult to attract and retain skills. And the other thing we kind of see across these regions is a reliance on fly-in, fly-out labor. There are people coming in and working across all different sectors. However, your construction and your resource development sector are heavily reliant on fly-in, fly-out labor in these regions. So what are some of the challenges to getting the skills? Some of these regions have aging populations. None of it would be your exception there. But however, across the three regions, we see declining participation in the labor market, be it either aging population or some of the barriers that some individuals face in joining the labor market and getting an education. Access to post-secondary education is also a major barrier in some of these northern regions. There's fewer institutes, smaller institutes, skills and training organizations help fill the gap, but they have less capacity to offer the number of programs that you maybe would see in the South. This contributes to outmigration, especially among youth. Youth leave these regions to attain some sort of post-secondary education of their choice, and often they don't return. Housing crisis across the country, but specifically impacts the North in that it's hard for employers to attract people with the skills to their region. And then we see a prevalent and persistent disparities in education and employment between Indigenous and non-Indigenous populations living in these regions. I will say that there are some improvements, but disparities still do exist. And the largest disparity for education would be a university level education, which goes back to the forecast and the need for post-secondary skills that is going to be forecasted there. Indigenous communities often also have to deal with not level funding for schools on or in Indigenous communities and outside of Indigenous communities. And Indigenous peoples and these communities are disproportionately impacted by mental health, homelessness, and addictions crises. And the last thing I'm going to touch on today to just kind of set the stage for the conversation later is some recommendations for closing these skills gap, which really focus along having a collaborative workforce development in the North. So some recommendations that we found in talking to employers, industry, governments is a need to strengthen industry education collaboration. In some regions, there has been significant efforts put into tracking labor market demands so that post-secondary institutes and training organizations can use this information for strategic planning so they can align their training programs with what we see in demand in the region. Expanding northern and rural post-secondary education pipelines. This has shown to be quite successful in some areas. I will say primary care doctors in Northern Ontario, this strategy has been shown to be quite effective, but it's just increasing the number of seats in very highly trained positions for those northern students. Not all of them will return, but they are the ones that are most likely to return to their communities with the skills that they've learned. Increasing work integrated learning opportunities in high schools. A lot of employers talked about the need to be able to showcase what a Northern career path potentially could look like before students hit and start making decisions about their post-secondary education. So getting more collaboration between governments and employers and education so that students can learn about Northern careers. Shifting skills training funding from short-term project-based models to long-term investments, something that's been highlighted, I think, over and over again. A lot of times, small skills and training organizations are filling the gap in these regions, and they're smaller organizations. So giving them more of a longer runway in terms of their funding helps facilitate their strategic planning. Expand the number of programs they can offer and progressive training because they know, for a certain number of years, we will have funding and this is how we can build upon what we've done. And it also helps reduce the administrative burden for sometimes these smaller training organizations. And then the last point that I'm going to make today on recommendations to kind of help support building a Northern resilient workforce is investing in Indigenous workforce development. So logistical investments around funding, but also logistical investments to help form strategic partnerships between Indigenous communities, post-secondary institutes, or training organizations and government to expand access to training at the regional level. There have been some great successes around mobile and community-based training programs for remote communities, with the understanding that the cost is greater there, but the payoff is also greater, and really focus on working with the community to make sure that the training that's coming into the community actually reflects the need that's in the community. And then the last thing I'll talk about is just skills and training organizations within these northern areas who are focused not on just building skills, but investing in wraparound supports for their learners, which again has a higher cost, but has a greater payoff. So these can be things like student success teams with counseling and tutoring, support for learners who do have to leave who would have to travel for work, having funding for subsidized education, and incorporating land-based learning into their training. And then the other thing a lot of skills training organizations in these regions are doing is investing in professional development as part of their skills training. So helping promote career paths so that learners can understand what they can do with the skills they've learned, supporting network building, and then helping prepare them for the labor market. So resume building and interview preparation. So that's it for me on kind of setting the stage and things that we've learned in the Learning from One Another project. Happy to kind of take any questions at the end and also point people in the direction of where they can find some of these products. And I am turning it over to, Trisha. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you so much, Amanda. And we got the transition right. So our team will be happy with that. Thanks so much. And, as you were saying your concluding remarks, I was like, I'm so glad that we have people coming to us speaking who are the actual experts in, some of these doing the work of this northern-based connective tissue organizations that you're talking about. So I am Trisha Williams from the Teacher Skills Center. I really want to thank our two panelists who I get to introduce and we get to have a conversation about. And they're really inspiring Indigenous leaders who are shaping the future of entrepreneurship in Canada. So I want to welcome Darian Kovacs, the founding partner of Jelly Digital Marketing and PR, who also wins award for best webinar setup. We are all praising Darian before we joined on the webinar today. Yeah. And Darian has a wealth of experience in elevating Indigenous businesses and voices through creative storytelling, digital marketing, and community building. And we're really thrilled to have you here, Darian. And we're also joined by Zena Cohen, co-director of Entrepreneur, an organization empowering entrepreneurs across the North to build sustainable businesses grounded in culture, connection, and community values. And that is the truth. Gosh, those are the right words to use when you describe Entrepreneur. So I want to welcome you both here to this conversation. And, we at the Future Skills Center, we spend, I would say, our discussions about Indigenous and Northern development are a lot around how we can work with you, the partners, the Indigenous leaders raising this conversation. So we're just really grateful to have you here with this conversation. We were, and I was thinking about how pleased we are to have this conversation with you because I think you both bring so much intentionality to your design work that you do with communities and with the initiatives that you're leading. And you're also thinking about both the clear and concrete next steps, as well as the systems elements of things all at the same time. And it's sometimes hard to hold both those elements together. So couldn't think of a better pair to kick us off with conversation. So let me start with, maybe we'll start with you first, Zena. You want to tell us a little bit about Entrepreneur? And, any opening reflections or comments before I pepper you with questions. But I know, we just heard a bit about economic resilience, skills building in the North, and Entrepreneur is doing so much. And can you share a little bit of that with the audience?
Sure. Thanks, Trisha. Hi, everybody. Let's see how many folks are here. Close 188 people. That's great. So nice to be with everybody and my friends Darian and Trisha. My name is Zena. My heritage is Irish, Scottish, and Mohawk. My maternal grandmother is the late Barbara Montour, and our Montour family is from Six Nations. But I now have the privilege of living on Kwanlin and Ta'anquachan territory in Whitehorse, Yukon. And I think Northern Canada is the most beautiful region in the world, and it's where we get to do our work at Entrepreneur. For folks who don't know much about our project, I'll just give you a little overview. We've been around for about 7.5 years. And from the very beginning, our belief has been that Northern Indigenous entrepreneurs can be catalysts of prosperity and drivers of social change within their own communities, and that the development of sustainable enterprises can create local economic opportunities to help break through poverty and strengthen Northern ways of life. So we really see entrepreneurs as these change makers who can be bringing value to their communities, hiring locally, and developing products and services that really respond to the local needs of Northerners. And for anybody who has spent any time in the North, you know that things up here are just done differently. We move at a different pace, different challenges, different opportunities. And I think Indigenous entrepreneurs in particular do encounter significant obstacles to growing businesses. Part of the issue, which was mentioned a little bit, is that folks living in remote communities have challenges accessing infrastructure, affordable housing, cost of shipping, and they're also confronted with limited educational offerings and face additional constraints to accessing capital. So that's kind of why Entrepreneurth came about. We recognized that what was really needed in the North was culturally relevant business education and wraparound supports that would allow entrepreneurs to launch and scale their businesses without having to leave their communities and travel down south. So over the years, we've really grown our suite of offerings kind of through our 4 directions of change impact framework to be looking at how policy impacts Indigenous entrepreneurs, to be looking at the power of storytelling and how amplifying the voices of Indigenous entrepreneurs can really help to grow the community. That's something that Darian literally does professionally, so he'll tell you all about it. We offer a lot of programs for early stage and aspiring entrepreneurs. And through that programming, we're also building technology in the North. So we're building an app that we're calling eNorth. It's part of the project we've developed with FSC that allows entrepreneurs to be developing their businesses from the comfort of home. And last but not least, access to capital. So we know that Indigenous entrepreneurs historically have had challenges accessing traditional loans through banks. Banks have not been friendly to Indigenous peoples. So Entrepreneurth is launching a $10 million fund that we're calling the Sinew Impact Fund. And for folks who don't know, sinew it's a traditional material that essentially comes from the animal. It's like a fiber that comes from the animal, from mammals, that Indigenous artists and hide tanners and hunters will use as almost like string to weave things together. So this is our response to that need for relational, non-extractive capital so that we can be flowing money into the hands of Indigenous Northerners. So Tricia, maybe I'll like zip it at that.
I mean, so much to follow up on there, and really glad to have you here, Zena. But we'll let Darian jump in because Darian also is doing so many things for Indigenous entrepreneurship. So I don't know where you want to start, Darian. I mean, I want you to talk about some of the vision you have around ISET holders, but as well as, you know, the storytelling that Zena's talking about and where you see, you know, your role in Jelly marketing with supporting Indigenous entrepreneurship.
Yeah, there's a term, kawachi haitoyak. It's my favorite Michif term. I'm currently learning Michif alongside my children. I have a 6, 9, 11, and 19-year-old, and we're learning this Michif language, which is the language my nation speaks. So I am Red River Métis. My family names are Bird, Brown, and Bruce. I'm living now in the Kwantlen land here in BC, also known as Fort Langley. And I've had this really cool opportunity to work in marketing. I was, and still am, a professional marketer and market for all these companies. But I think what I saw around me was the industry was very homogenous and was very limited in who was getting in, who was represented. And then it came to the point where people were contacting me to say, hey, we would love to hire you to help us figure out how to have Indigenous representation for our brand. You know, X bank, multinational bank would be like, we want that. But I was like, what would it be like if someone was actually at the water cooler with them hanging out? Right? Like someone like Azina who's like, what's up? What'd you make for lunch today? It's like, check out my lunch. I got like, so like just, and then it's like, hey, we're going to do this campaign. And it's going to be up in the north. We'd love your thoughts. And it's like, great, I'll come into the office with you because we work together as peers. But when we went into looking at what does this look like, we had a course, but we wanted to make sure it was accessible. So we actually started working and partnering with CCIB. So working with Indigenous business owners and entrepreneurs to say, how do we amplify your business and help you as leaders so that you could really leverage who your business is, amplify your story, and also just get online. I feel right now we're in a very, I would call it, distracted time where people are discovering AI and realizing it's this thing and it's a shiny object, and you know, institutions and organizations are spending millions in chasing this, but there's still thousands of people left behind who have still yet to put a website up. And so the way that we go about it is, how do we make sure that no one is left behind, and that tech and that accessibility to the economic awesomeness is available for all people. There's an amazing quote. Marie Sinclair said, education got us into this mess, and education's going to get us out of it. It's a really poignant saying where, you know, we see you know, kind of the remnants of what has happened, but how do we flip it using education, using skilling, using access to opportunity to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to learn how to build a website, launch a business, grow their business, amplify their story, and also get the certifications to get jobs into the marketplace all around the world. And the greatest thing about the post-COVID time is that we're able to work with all these Indigenous communities who can then stay in community, get a job in, say, Toronto or New York or Vancouver, but still live in community and support their community, but yet working remote, which has been pretty cool.
Oh, that's tremendous. And I think, you know, we heard from Amanda's presentation about all the demand, right? Like there's a demand for skills and demand for people to work in the North and with Indigenous communities. And I think you're talking about, yeah, really making sure that Indigenous peoples and communities are at the center of that, right? And are able to benefit from that demand. I wonder, Zina, if you can tell us a little bit more about, you know, I was really struck by your, and you know, when I was visiting, I attended the Entrepreneur Conference and you launched the Impact Fund. I'm struck by, like, you know, your recognition that it's not going to be just about skills, that there are these like systemic barriers, like you're saying, like the lack of capital. And, you know, what led Entrepreneur to identify that, and how do you see, you know, the ecosystem to really, like, what are the parts that we need to have in place to support Indigenous entrepreneurs? And I say that knowing that there's going to be a lot of like public infrastructure projects, and I'm sure everyone's going to want to put on the window dressing of like, we're working with Indigenous groups. How do we make sure that's a real opportunity for Indigenous communities and not just like a PR thing?
Yeah, totally. And it's so interesting right now living in the North. I feel like the Arctic is very hot. Everybody's looking at the opportunities that are going to be coming up here. And it's really crucial for us to think about, how can Indigenous community members not just be at those tables, but sort of be central in making decisions about, what does procurement look like? How can opportunities be flowing into communities? I think to your question around capital, it's something that Entrepreneur recognized from day one. And I'll say, it's taken us years to figure out the right model for developing an impact fund. But we knew from the very beginning, you can work with somebody to develop their skills and confidence and network until the cows come home. But unless there's access to that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, it's going to be really challenging for an entrepreneur to get beyond that sort of year, 2 years. And so I think we felt after a couple of kicks at the can, we had to be developing a fund that was rooted in the North and was directly responding to the needs of Northern entrepreneurs. So we've got a really great team leading that work. And I think the other piece that we've had to acknowledge is the trauma that a lot of Indigenous peoples have associated with money. So it's not enough to just say, you know, here's an investment, now you're going to succeed. There has to be a lot of relational care and other supports that come along with that investment, so that people are able to really find that sense of, you know, I feel good about this, and I feel good about the growth that I'm experiencing. So everything at Entrepreneur sort of takes that holistic lens. Yeah, I think that's the way that's needed in order for entrepreneurs to really succeed. And at Entrepreneur, it's not just about the business development, it's about the well-being of the entrepreneur. If you are not well, it's really hard for your business to be well. And that's one of the reasons why we brought everybody together last August in Yellowknife. It can be really isolating to be the sole entrepreneur in your remote community of 300 people. So making sure that those personal networks are strong is key.
That's great. Darian, I saw you nodding, so.
I just love this. I feel like you put together, and for lack of a better term, the Hannah Montana model here. Like, you brought together the best of both worlds, right? Like, if you remember that best of both worlds, that is a show from the 2000s. But it's like married. Like, again, we can provide opportunity, we can give the skilling, we can have access to that information. But like, I love what Entrepreneur North is doing when it's like they take it to that next level. It's like again, we can open up doors, we can get them growing their business, but of course there is a glass ceiling. So I just thank you for bringing us together here for this.
Yeah, it's true. Do you want to tell us a little bit, Darian, about, like, you've also been working with these Indigenous skills and education training holders.
Yes.
And I think that's another example of like where these, you know, there's in this case, there are resources available, but there's another level of support that you're seeking to bring. And, you know, FSC's been partnering with you to try to do some of that. You maybe just explain to the audience, what is ISET? What are the needs there? How have you had a vision around supporting this systemic effort?
Yeah, I think Zena said it so well, the issue of isolation. And so we built this course, started offering it, different folks started taking the course. I belong to a nation, our own ISET office offered it as an option outside of just blue collar training. We called it new collar training, or no collar training, because jobs that didn't exist 10 years ago are jobs you don't need to wear a collar for to show up to work. And I started working with these different, what's called Indigenous Skills and Employment Training Offices. It is probably the most unknown department within the federal government. It's under ESDC, and it's ISET is the acronym, not ISED to be confused with the other department. But there's 119 of these offices across Canada. We started working with a bunch. They receive funding to help Indigenous folks either become a stronger, better entrepreneur or get a job in a skills and job out there so they could make an income and do well for themselves. They support 50,000 learners a year. 50,000 learners are supported through this program. But because it's separated amongst 119 offices, no one really knows about it. Like, we know about Inspire, which supports about 8,000 students a year and about 24 million. But this is 50,000 students and about 300 million a year. But I realized the biggest issue is that they're all working in isolation, and even amongst distinctives. So Métis, Inuit, First Nations, and urban, they weren't really meeting together. And so I just thought it'd be interesting as an experiment to invite a bunch out to a party in Ottawa the day before this event called Connexus, and about 60 showed up the first year, and somehow it worked. We spent a day together and just started doing what's called sharing wise practices. And it was so cool because this resource developed in Thunder Bay, which was incredible for Indigenous students on the spectrum, was able to share with this woman who was in Edmonton who had a bunch of students who were on this, and they were like, hey, we've been trying to build something, but look what you've done. And they're like, we built this piece. And it was almost like they put these Lego pieces together and built the most amazing piece, because in isolation, they were building things on their own. And it was like the math of like 1 + 1 = 3 was happening. And so we did it again last year. And again, I called up Nolan, who works at Future Skills Center. I was like, you want to come to this thing? And he, without like hesitation, he showed up and he said, this is what we're doing. We want to work with you. This would be amazing. And I think people were more shocked because it was like, he wasn't just there as the token white guy that we invited. He actually was like, hey, I actually want to work with you. I want to listen to you. And it was a beautiful moment to just be like, what do you need? What would make your lives better? And we realized there was 3 major issues of, one, how do we keep gathering together nationally so we can share these wise practices? How do we build resources nationally, like mental health resources, a scholarship report, a support system? And so we're actually able to, thanks to last year Connexus, we built a report on the best ways to support students going into post-secondary. And so the largest national report on ways to support Indigenous learners, and it covered Inuit to First Nations to Métis to urban students, got published last year. We're publishing it again. And then Future Skills Center was like, hey, what else do you need? And I realized us as a leadership team, we were meeting over Zoom. So we got to host a meeting in Vancouver where we got to meet and plan and actually intimately collaborate and actually really get to know each other. And I think one of the neatest anecdotal stories is that for years, over 30 years, there's been 2 major ISET offices in the province of Saskatchewan. And they had never actually met before or were met. And so I think like after that meeting in Vancouver, I got a text being like, hey, can you share that person's cell number? I'd love to meet them. And I shared the cell, just seeing what happened. And a few weeks later, there's all these photos on LinkedIn being like, hey, our office met with this office for the first time. This is really cool. And it may sound like some random LinkedIn posting, but like I'm sitting there crying at my computer being like, that was so incredible and powerful. Because I think, again, historically, there's been certain histories that have desired that we don't get organized, right? And we don't get too collaborative, and we don't plan too well together. But I think that Future Skills gave us this excuse to become more intimate, this excuse to collaborate more. And the coolest thing ever, actually, coming up in January, we're actually inviting every of the largest workforce HR associations and sector councils. Future Skills is hosting a luncheon where all 20 of them will share their biggest job needs for the coming year. Because again, how do we know, as Wayne Gretzky says, you got to skate where the puck is going. How do we know where to skill our students? And so they're going to share with us over a lunch period, network, because really this is the coolest thing, is the script is being flipped. Because instead of being like, oh, woe is the Indigenous person, it's like, we have the largest, strongest, best workforce in the entire country, and it's growing and it's brilliant and they're incredible. And the funding system that's already in place is powerful and amazing. So if we can partner better with workforce associations and get funders to see what we're actually doing and be able to support the things that the ESDC can't fund, that's the dream and that's the vision there. And so pretty excited what's going to happen in January.
You are a great storyteller because you told that story in a very compelling, convincing way. But I just want to say kudos for both of you. I am hearing this thread of like, yes, we need skills. Yes, we know there's demand, but there's also this connective tissue. And I don't want to, you rightfully named your impact on the Sinu Fund, Zina, because I think you're also talking about connective tissue, Darian, in terms of what, breaking down that isolation, bringing people together, convening. And I think, that's why there are G7 meetings, right? Because we know that people need to meet, they need to discuss. So we accept this in our kind of other areas of work. And it's really important as we seek to like make sure Indigenous communities are at the center of these new opportunities and have are central in that. I want to maybe ask before, I think there's a few questions coming in, but maybe before I turn to audience questions, so we have a few minutes for that, I want to say there's a lot of people on this call, which is great. I'm sure I saw in the notes, some are Indigenous organizations themselves. Some are probably non-Indigenous organizations that are thinking, how do we support Indigenous organizations? How do we work with supporting entrepreneurship or economic resilience? I think, Zena, you started to touch on this a little bit. But from your perspective, what does a respectful, reciprocal partnership look like in practice? Like, what are some of the practices? And what should institutions keep in mind when engaging?
Like from entrepreneurs, like what has looked like respectful partnerships with us? Yeah, like I'm thinking about the work that we have done with Future Skills Center. And I was having a conversation yesterday. So the MasterCard Foundation is one of our big partners. Their LV team is absolutely phenomenal. And one of the joys of working with the LV team at the MasterCard Foundation is that it's a predominantly Indigenous team. And that makes a really big difference. So I really love to see just on the philanthropy side of things, how that's shifting. And there are Indigenous leaders in philanthropy who are really shifting what that power dynamic looks like between funder and grantee, or whatever you want to call us. I think people in the North are really used to folks from down South. And sorry if I'm offending anybody, but like researchers, people coming up here to like figure out what's going on and like how to solve the issues in the North. And I think Northerners have an acute understanding of what the challenges are and also what the solutions are. The innovation and the brilliance that exists up here is phenomenal. And we see that every day with the entrepreneurs who we serve. And I think a really respectful partnership looks like one that is rooted in co-learning. So figuring things out together. Entrepreneurs, we're still, I mean, every day we're like learning as we go. Literally, we're figuring things out. And I think it's great when our partners can be taking that same approach. And that has been our experience with Future Skills Center. And I think, giving projects in the North the resources they need to be, literally, I feel like innovating means trying things for the first time, likely failing, and then trying again. So I think we need runway to be figuring things out. And I think that we also need space to be identifying what impact looks like to us, versus having some sort of evaluator come in and sort of identify this is what impact in the North looks like. Yeah, sorry, I keep going back to the MasterCard Foundation because they've been with us from the get-go, but as folks on the call may know, MasterCard Foundation, the majority of their work has been in Africa historically, and only in the last 7 years have they been, working with Indigenous communities in Canada. But a couple of years ago, their board, the MasterCard Foundation board, came up to the Yukon, lots of folks from Africa, folks from the United States. And I think they were struck by how vast the landmass is here, and how small the population is. So you don't have the millions of people that you see in Africa. And for somebody from the outside, you might look at Entrepreneur's numbers and say, they worked with 50 people last year, like that's it. But when you think about the significance of one entrepreneur in a community of 300 and what that ripple effect is, it's enormous. So I think that was a great learning opportunity. Yeah, just having that understanding that we're going to be learning together, and trusting that Northerners know what they need.
I love that so much. And I promise I didn't ask that question because I was looking for you to say nice things about Future Skills. But, before this role, I was at MasterCard Foundation for many years. And I can say, again, that intentionality of design, right, comes through, and I'm glad that they've showed up as a good partner to you and collaborator. I will also note, our director of programs would want me to mention that we have a posting right now for Indigenous lead at FSC, and we're really hoping to get somebody wonderful on our team. And so if anyone, please check it out. I'm sure it's on our LinkedIn page, the positions listed. Darian, any reflection thoughts? You've also been deep in partnership work for so many years. What advice would you give to folks looking to partner?
I think it was special on that event in Vancouver. We thought we'd experiment with someone else, and we invited funders out, you know, RBC to MasterCard to come and listen to actual Indigenous, you know, skills and development staff, frontline workers who are, again, too busy to write an application, too busy doing the work to fill out a form and jump through all the big hoops. But it was so cool to see funders coming to the table saying, hey, we are willing and considering not just funding like red meat and a white bread sandwich, right? Which has been the historic thing where it's got, if you're going to fund Indigenous, it's got to be wrapped in some kind of white veil or white packaging. And so I love, you know, right away, Future Skills, as soon as first time I met Nolan, I was like, hey, are you up for crazy stuff? Are you up to working directly with actual Indigenous peoples who will have ideas that you may not expect? And that was the coolest thing, is like everything we've thrown at you, you're like, let's try it. And I think it's cool in Ottawa, we're inviting the funders again. The event went so well that we have, I think, like 30 funders now coming up to be like, how do we do Indigenous funding differently? Which I think is so special. And again, groups like Best Buy, when we mentioned, hey, we had students across the country, and especially in the north and, you know, in rural areas who didn't have proper cell phones or laptops, Best Buy right away came alongside and says, we'll ship them a new laptop, we'll ship them a new cell phone. So, and again, you would never hear about it. They probably aren't even happy that I'm mentioning this, but there's certain organizations and corporations that are doing things not for the credit and are making things easy and simple and just trying to make things streamlined. And I think that's one of the greatest, I think, challenges right now, I would say, is how do we continue to listen to what the actual needs are? Again, one of the biggest surprises I even had out of our Vancouver meeting was LinkedIn training. You know, so many of the managers and frontline workers were like, hey, how do I use this LinkedIn tool better? And it wasn't, and how do we get also better mental health resources? Because those are two things that were not under their, you know, funding prerogative. And so being able to actually listen and listen and listen, and then, okay, how do we articulate this to find the right partners for it? But again, I can't stress this last part enough. As much as we've been training students and getting them jobs and putting them into workforces, I think I'm learning in this last year, the more we can also train the entrepreneurs and train the actual leaders to work alongside the students where they could work collaboratively. So we launched a new initiative this last year called the Workforce Readiness Program. So we're actually training an entrepreneur and training a student. And thanks to the SWIP funding, we're able to pair them up so they get, you know, a 6-month salary. So the entrepreneur gets an employee for 6 months. The employee gets 6 months work experience. And at the end of the 6 months, the business has grown, they've helped things, they can ideally hire that person full-time afterwards and maybe even hire more people from their community. So it's just this beautiful marriage we're learning of, like, if we don't work alongside entrepreneurs and business owners and corporations with the students, you know, in isolation, it never works.
That's a great example of what it means, what it looks like in practice. I love that. We have some questions coming in, which I see, oh gosh, my team has flagged a lot of them that we're going to answer live, which, warning, we will not answer them all live. So, but we will be sending information afterwards in a follow-up email. So I would love to tackle a couple of these. Maybe if we don't mind, so there's a couple questions for Amanda here as well. So I think this is kind of across. One of the questions here is, you know, in what way do you think the unique context of Northern Ontario, Yukon, Nunavut could inform broader national skills development strategies? And a similar question for entrepreneurs, like, you know, what can mainstream entrepreneurship programs learn from Entrepreneur's example? Like, what do you, and I think I already heard a couple of things, but Amanda, maybe if we don't mind bringing Amanda back on, like, what do you think other skills development strategies in other regions should be learning from the North about how they're approaching things? in doing this?
I think what struck me a lot in doing the work and the comparison work between the three regions is the number of similarities and the challenges that they all face. Indigenous communities in southern parts of the country as well often kind of experience the same sort of challenges. So I think there's definitely a lot that can be learned. In terms of the specific learning, I'm not going to start going into specific things, but I think a lot of the findings from the North are things that translate to the South, and especially Indigenous communities in the South.
Zena, what would you say? What do you think mainstream entrepreneurship programs should be learning from you?
Yeah, I think a lot of us are still recovering and haven't even realized that we're still recovering from the impacts of COVID, and all just the sort of the burden and the heaviness of what's going on in the world at large, kind of like politically, social injustices. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs right now are looking for programming that does bring their wholeness and wellness to the forefront, and that can be really flexible and customizable and responsive to their needs. So our cohort program, as an example that we run every year, it's a program for 8 to 10 entrepreneurs, all within a similar sector. And I mean, whatever they've got going on, our goal is to be responsive to them. I think really individualized mentorship is super important, making sure that we're able to offer childcare and bursaries, data subsidies for folks in the North is really important. And then figuring out how to be supporting the entrepreneurs after their accelerator or cohort experience is done. What we've seen is some of the entrepreneurs in our network are only in a place to launch their business 2 to 3 to 4 years after the program is done. So how do we sort of create some of that continuity? And that's something that, again, we're kind of in the process of figuring out right now.
I'll share this. I'm going to pump up Entrepreneur. I heard this elder, Duke Redbird, share this recently. He shared at this event. He goes, I want to talk about elder rhythms instead of algorithms. We always talk about algorithms in the digital sphere, but elder rhythms. And I think what's so special, and I think, again, people get, let's support Indigenous programs, let's do it. But also on the flip side, what if we looked up to and could learn from the work that Entrepreneur North is doing, because they understand resiliency, I think, more than any other entrepreneur program I've been a part of. So because Jelly Academy's never been, we didn't put a feather on it. You don't know, it's hard to tell unless you met all of our instructors or knew who it was owned by, you wouldn't know that it was fully Indigenous. So we've been involved. We've licensed to UBC, Centennial College. We've been involved with all these different organizations. But I can honestly say the stuff that Entrepreneur North is doing has a deeper and a better understanding of a resiliency, bootstrapping, being what the true definition of entrepreneurship is, and the true definition of social innovation, better than most organizations I've worked with across North America. Like even Ashoka, right? Like Ashoka is this, birthplace of social innovation, but like entrepreneur, like it's in our DNA. We've grown up with a respect for elder rhythms, right? We've understood mentorship from day one since we were born. We've understood what it's like to be isolated, forgotten. Like I'm part of the Métis, we are known as the forgotten people. Like our people are forging paths in this country. And so I think there's something where if other programs took a beat, a moment, and just, hired entrepreneurs to be like, look at our program, because you're going to have students in your program that aren't going to always have a rich uncle or a rich aunt, right? And so, because I think so many programs are built around the assumption you have a rich uncle, right? Or a connection somewhere. And so I think there's so much that I learned from Entrepreneur North, and we all can learn from Entrepreneur North around resiliency. And especially, I believe in the next 4 years, we're going to need resiliency as entrepreneurs, and everyone's going to need it more than ever.
Oh gosh, that was beautiful, Darian. And thank you. I agree with so much of what you said. And I was thinking about like this thread that's woven through our conversation has been about like not having transactional relationships, right? Having it be relational. And I think that extends to the relationship with the entrepreneurs you're working with. And it's also about, yes, we care about economic impact. We want people to be able to pay for food and housing and the things that make a good life. But we also care about social relationships. We care about community. And how do we, you know, look at that? And I think you're right that it is built into the DNA of entrepreneurs' work. And that is something that I hope others, you know, learn from and take away from that as well. And reflects in the opportunities that are available. As you know, we started out with that presentation of the opportunities, the demand for skills, and I think we're well positioned to have Indigenous communities at the center of that is going to involve choices from, you know, investors, from policymakers, researchers, from all of the different ecosystem actors to put that at the center. So thank you so much to all of you. I can close with maybe a 1-minute final closing thing before I hand it back to Christian. Anything you want to leave the audience with before we hand it over, and make sure everyone fills out their survey at the end. And through researcher fashion, I'm going to get a plug in for that. But Zena, Darian, who wants to go first?
What I feel sometimes at Entrepreneur is that we actually are in a little bubble up here, because our realities are so unique. And it's been, you know, important for me and our leadership team over the years to be coming out of our little bubble and developing relationships with friends like Darian and you folks at Future Skills Center. What I would encourage is for more people to come north and to come up and actually get to experience what life is like here and how entrepreneurship is different here, how the tourism sector and the arts sector is different here. And just as a little shameless plug, Entrepreneur will be hosting its next Empowering Innovation Spirit conference August 25th and 26th here in Whitehorse, Yukon. So we'll be circulating a save the date soon. And we certainly invite ecosystem partners from across Canada to come and learn and share. And Darian, we got to get you up here too, 1000%. Yes. Thank you.
Well, I want to show you, I mentioned this and someone actually asked this very question, is academics and working with academics. And we've worked with a bunch of academics. We built the first applied AI course that's in the high school system in the country of Canada. It's in the BC district as a 4-credit grade 12 course, and Alberta as a 4-credit course. We have one of the largest applied AI courses because as Indigenous entrepreneurs, we've needed to be always on the cutting edge, embracing technology, embracing what's best. Like the stuff they've developed in Entrepreneur around like holistic support. And people are just catching up to it now to be like, oh, maybe we should have mentors in our business program. But academics, I want to speak to you right now and just say, hey, if you are feeling maybe fear or intimidation by some of these groups by saying, man, they are ahead of us, or you feel intimidated that they're Indigenous and maybe you're not comfortable with Indigenous people, I would say like, take a moment to just put that fear aside, put the intimidation aside, and just be like, there is some amazing things you can learn and partner with them on. And we've seen that in continuing ed departments across the country. For some reason, Con Ed seems to be this entrepreneurial, we care about what happens in academics more than anything. And so when that's happened, you create this beautiful, kind of peanut butter and jelly, Miley Cyrus, Hannah Montana kind of ecosystem where you can support each other. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other. And I can admit, I've learned from the world of academics, as much as it's like there's big colonial, big structures, there's parts of it that have actually been beneficial for us as well. So I just say, let's both put our ego aside or fear aside of each other, intimidation aside. And I think there's something really cool here when we work well together.
What a beautiful closing comment. Thank you to both of you. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Zena and Darian. Quickly back to you, Christian.
Thank you. All right. Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you again to our panelists, our speaker, you, the attendees, for being part of this important conversation. We have heard great insights. We are out of time, so I would just say that we encourage you to continue this conversation in your communities and organizations. Please take a moment when you log out to complete our survey. There's a pop-up window that will appear when you exit Zoom. Our feedback will help us grow and improve. And lastly, we want to encourage you to follow us on our social media especially on Blue Sky and LinkedIn. So thank you again and for being here and for your engagement. And we are going to follow up with some resources in a few days. Thanks.